My name's Ryan Pearson, and for the past 3 years at Takeda, we've been on a transformational journey. I want to tell you our story today. By the way, I'm honored to be able to speak for so many of my Takeda colleagues here today who've been involved in this over the past 3 years. Takeda is one of the world's leading biopharma companies. At 240 years old, Takeda is also one of the world's oldest companies. And I think we owe our sustainable growth in part to our cycles of reinvention. Over the past 3 years, we've begun that cycle anew. Our mission at Takeda is to create better health and a brighter future for the world. Many of our cynics out there will scoff at that, but it's absolutely the mission that caused me to join Takeda. Even in IT, we don't come to work to play with the latest technology. We come to work because we believe that we can help cure cancer. Science and innovation is really our business. But sometimes, and speaking now only for IT, we lose our way. So I'll talk now about the weight of the past. When I joined Takeda in 2019 as head of architecture and modernization, we had recently acquired Shire and were embarking on a mission to rationalize and modernize our technology estate. We had thousands of business applications and a lot of them were duplicated. As we surveyed that landscape, it was like an untended garden. There were years of overgrowth and it was neglected and it was essentially limiting what we could do. What new innovation could grow and flourish in this environment? IT's energy was spent on mostly maintaining our old, not building the new. We could not support or build the latest technology in our aging data centers. We had neither the skills nor the funding to keep up with the leading edge of innovation. And so from a data perspective, there was no central data catalog. There was no central data pipeline. There was no common data lake. And we were purchasing commercial data sets over and over again without sharing that data. The data we produced was not shareable with our partners. And there was not a single source of truth. So this was really a dead-end situation for IT, and we had to make a change. Additionally, there was kind of a recipe for disruption, as many of you are aware. The extended global life expectancy is driving healthcare spend up to about $10 trillion in 2022. That's about 14% of the world GDP. There's new science that's driving a lot of growth and that's shaping innovation, but there's a lot of questions still about cost and access to care. So new customers. The population of people 60 plus is rising from about 900 million in 2015 to 1.4 billion in 2025. And there's new customer demands from the younger population who are now over 50% consuming healthcare from a retail marketplace rather than a primary care physician. Technology has infiltrated all of healthcare. So the approval processes, medication management, treatment. There are 13 or more digital therapeutics that are now launched on the market and being prescribed by doctors. And there's new rules, right? So advances in regulation, there's advances in the supply chain, and there's new players that are springing up. So it's really an existential crisis for an older company like ours. We knew we needed to disrupt ourselves. So we needed to do something. And as my high school science teacher said, all transformation, whether it's evolutionary or revolutionary, will require an initial energy input and usually a catalyst. So our options were to add new energy, to free up and repurpose that old energy, or both. And anything else we felt was just going to be a process of slow decay. So our first step was to prepare the ground. And I talked about that earlier with our the rationalization of our technology estate as part of merger with Shire. We made it our mission to weed our garden. So, and that was really to free up the energy for transformation, I would say. So over the next 18 months, we ripped out and we rationalized about half of the applications in the estate. And that was just getting ready for what was to come. As we surveyed kind of our technology landscape at that point, it's important to talk about what we face because I think many of you will face the same thing. We had several failed journeys actually to cloud, whether it was Azure or AWS across the two companies. And our technology landscape was, I would say, overly complex. Our processes were very manual, not agile in the slightest. It was very ticket-based, waterfall, and our processes needed significant improvement. We had significant technology debt, and here I mean that many of our operating systems were old enough to vote, as we like to say. And we needed to do a lot of technology modernization. There was also a lot of entrenched thinking, right? We had few builders. We were heavily outsourced. We brought in partners to do a lot of our technology build. So we did not have the DNA. We did not have the digital muscle, I would say, to build the new within Takeda ourselves. So we chose AWS, and we didn't do that as an all-in on the first step. The initial driver was actually related to our enterprise data backbone. So these were the services that would really form the central nervous system, if you will, of a digital Takeda. And it's really the way to integrate our data across business units. For the first time, we were really going to get shared insights and a handle on the digital potential of the data we already had. And so we worked with our global IT leaders as well as our Takeda executive team leaders to select AWS officially for that purpose. Now, why did we do that? Well, of course, we looked across AWS, Azure, Google, some other competitors, and we looked at common things like time to market, TCO, resource availability, and we found, honestly, that many of the providers were fairly even in these areas. But the areas that set AWS apart for us had to do with the following. So first, the digital metropolis, as we like to say, right? So life sciences market adoption of AWS was quite high. And here I mean that AWS as the primary provider for many life sciences companies that are our peers. And we felt that this would enable us to better partner with those organizations and certainly with academia, and really form a way for us to share amongst ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. The information security and regulatory compliance dimension was very important to us. Regulatory compliance in particular, we felt that AWS had the strongest approach to regulatory compliance in the shared responsibility model, that they had the most certifications and the most third-party audited artifacts available. The uptime was higher at the time that we evaluated it. Looking at the trailing year, there were 40 times less downtime minutes on AWS compared to Azure. And finally, and most importantly to us, AWS was contributing to the open science community. Again, we feel that our job is to contribute to the science, to patient outcomes, and patient first, right? So we have many collaborations ourselves. We appreciated the fact that at the time AWS was participating in BioForum and the global alliances. So we ended up choosing AWS for our data. And it was a little bit tricksy for us because we knew at the time that when we chose AWS for our data, we were really choosing AWS for the company. So what was the spark? As I mentioned earlier, there wasn't any really trust in a central IT-led cloud strategy at the time. And we were running into an immune system. So some of you know kind of what I'm talking about here. There's always the well-meaning individuals who are stuck in the old ways, who will always tell you why not, rather than how we might. We believe that we can achieve better outcomes sometimes with the same old process, the same old infrastructure. And the trouble is that's not the case. We knew that if we kept on doing what we had always been doing, we'd keep getting what we always got. We certainly wouldn't have access to the advanced technologies that we have today if we had stayed in their data centers. We wouldn't have any of the cloud native innovations available. And not to mention that, we would still be stuck in the ongoing overhead and administration of all that technology. But we had a dream that one day IT could once again be the trusted innovation partner that the business always wanted. we believed we could reset the expectation of what IT could do, that we could spark a digital transformation. The rebellion was born one night in a Microsoft Word document, and it was sort of like a digital manifesto. It recognized our disruptive forces and the existential imperative we had for change, and we circulated that widely. And at the beginning, there were a lot of detractors. In fact, really just a few believers. But there were believers, right? So they weren't many at first. And for those who were seeking something new, something more, it was kind of like the spark that lit a flame for us. So we had planned at the time that we would just migrate our 13 core data centers to 6. And it was a really standard approach. We wouldn't be impacting the business very much. It would just be a series of large application migration events. And it was a status quo approach. We would get the same thing that we had always gotten. We would certainly reduce a lot of our spend, but we would be committing to 5 years or more of a data center-led approach. So at this point, we created a business case that showed significant 5-year savings on the strength of retiring our data centers, even with a lift and shift approach. And this is really when Project Fuji was born. So as you probably guessed, Project Fuji was used because it symbolizes something about Japanese culture and spirit, but it's also a symbol of a peak of attainment, right? And it wasn't conceived as just a technology-driven public cloud migration. It was a digital transformation journey from the outset. So it addressed all dimensions of what we needed to do to achieve patient outcomes. And certainly the foundation stone of this was the technology infrastructure and the data as a digital platform enabler. But really, we were looking at creating an innovation engine for Takeda because we felt that that was the way that we could drive better patient outcomes through digital health. And we partnered with AWS and Accenture in this journey because we knew that we needed a catalyst. We needed more horsepower than we had within Takeda to get this done. We also needed guides kind of up the mountain, if you will. Of course, we announced all of this to our investors and the Takeda executive team. There was a long sales process internally, but it was an all-in commitment moment, and it was one that we needed, right? So once we had that buy-in from our executive team and from the investors, we were off to the races. And like I said, you can't do something like this alone, right? So I've got a slide here that shows our kind of process. Of course, we went through another application disposition cycle, migration planning, migration design and execution, and really spinning up a high throughput engine for lift and shift migrations. We faced a ton of challenges. Some of that was to build a global infrastructure all over again in the cloud. We built 6 AWS regions in about 8 months. We did the first region about 6 months, and then the others followed kind of as a rinse and repeat. And meanwhile, we were building our digital muscle through this kind of factory migration journey. But that's not all we did, and this is really important. So our goal initially was to enable the factory migrations, but we had to do more in order to demonstrate value, and we had to do that quickly. So we, like I said earlier, were creating a digital flywheel, and the cloud migration and modernization was just the first step. We were building a digital foundation, but we were also trying to find opportunities to adopt the cloud native capabilities, the new ways of working, and to really enable digital initiatives. And we're going to talk about a couple of those in a minute. Another great example is the COVID Plasma Alliance. Right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was a desire for all the plasma companies to get together to see what we could do with convalescent plasma, whether this could help patients who were afflicted with COVID-19 recover faster. And we spun that up in about a weekend. right? So we used AWS Control Tower and Lake Formation to stand up the initial environment. And that proceeded very quickly to a phase 3 clinical trial for a hyperimmune therapy. Of course, the endpoints were not met here, but scientific progress isn't always about, getting to a good outcome. It's also about learning what doesn't work. And we were able, together with our partners, to do this very quickly on AWS, right? And I think sometimes learning to fail fast is also a great lesson. We also accelerated our digital transformation for our entire plasma business unit. And during COVID, we reached 1.2 million additional donors during the pandemic. And, again, plasma, the supply of plasma drives many therapies for people across the world. So it was very important to us that we reach new donors and we source more plasma for our supply chain. So 100% of our donor centers were migrated during the pandemic to AWS, so 150 or so in the US. And we were able to reach these new donors through new digital channels that we never had before. So we had mobile push notifications, a Facebook chatbot, and some others. We were able to build our entire analytics pipeline on AWS very quickly. So we now have, it says 1,036 new insights. There are really 30 new dashboards. All of these are based on real-time data insights, where before, they were based on, batch processes. And we launched 8 new digital products for our plasma business unit over the last year. And some of these are about improving the donor experience. Some of them are about improving the nurses' experience, or helping centers support each other if they have shortfalls in resourcing. How have we changed over the last 5 years, or the last 2 years? So our mostly lift and shift migration, which really isn't the end of our journey, we've moved 80% of our applications to the cloud. So 615 of our apps have been migrated to AWS, and 402 have been retired. Some of the rest have been moved to software as a service. We are now at about a $36 million annual run rate on AWS. We've closed about 9 of our 13 data centers. And we've, by the way, achieved some significant sustainability outcomes here too, with almost 2,000 metric tons of CO2 removed over what we would have produced in the data center world. The scale here is about 30 petabytes of data that we've migrated. It's really over about 8,000 virtual machines that we're running in 3 geographic regions plus China. And so what's next for us? Now that we've done this, what can we do, right? So Takeda has digital ambitions here around, of course, telehealth and digital medicine, which we feel AWS will be able to help us with in terms of prototyping, scalability, some services, obviously, with Alexa. We're looking at interconnected healthcare systems, right? So, things like combining, telehealth use cases with enterprise data and partnership, right? Personalized treatment. So looking at how we can connect to rare disease patients who may be very far away from specialists. And then smart manufacturing. So looking at IoT capabilities and blockchain technology. And the thing about AWS that we appreciate is that all of these technologies are available to us through an API call, right? So it's really our will in being able to consume these resources that will drive the future of Takeda. I want to leave you with a few thoughts here. So the first one is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And for us, we really took a lot of time in building the coalition internally, but also partnering with the right partners. It started out slowly at first, and we were a bit frustrated, I think, with the progress initially. But over the past months, we have been able to accelerate to really, thousands of workloads being migrated per month. The second is, never underestimate that a small band of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's really the only thing that ever has. You need to lead a digital rebellion at your company. You really need to depart for something new and challenge the status quo. And part of that challenge is that very few people really understand what that looks like. So you're going to need to get some folks from the outside who've been there and done that. But you're also going to need to inspire individuals within your team. You need a core group of really passionate people who will really challenge the old ways. And the last thing is, yes, this is hard. This is hard stuff. It's not something that's a silver bullet. Even with a catalyst, even with a partner, there's no getting around that the journey is going to be hard for you. For me, it's been at once the most challenging thing I've ever done and the most rewarding. But the thing that I've noticed is there's something about those big challenges that calls forth more from our teams, right? Certainly that's been the case at Takeda. So whether you're climbing a mountain or changing a 240-year-old company, the real alchemy here is to bring forth the best in your people, to challenge the process, and really to use the technology for the benefit of the patient. And with that, I leave you. Thank you very much for your time.